Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Associate Professor and Program Director of Communication, Media, and Ethics at Mid-American Christian University. I'm here with our Week 2 lecture series for COM 2113, Media Culture and Social Influence. Now, I know what you're thinking. It may or may not be Week 2 when you're receiving this, but that's okay because part of our design plan is to provide students with an asynchronous learning experience, which means that information is traveling all the time. We're sending and we're receiving, we're encoding and we're decoding to tease some of the questions from this week. And hopefully part of this ongoing dialogue, whether you're ahead or behind of this conversation, you're part of it. And also what we can recognize and appreciate is, in essence, what we've done is fold over those traditional lengths of that semester-long course into this accelerated cycle, so that what you might be experiencing is layers of information, layers of lessons, layers of exposure to key terms and ideas and things, so that however much you take in and whatever your pace or preference, you're going to at least be offered that opportunity and exposure to a number of useful and fruitful readings and terms and theories and perspectives and ideas and conversations and questions, which is the focus of the video lecture series. It's less a lecture than what I refer to as an asynchronous dialogue. We're taking your questions, your reactions to the readings, the weekly readings, and building that into material to have a kind of fragmented, fractured, time-traveling conversation, discussion about the reading. So I have all my resources here with me. I've got my trusty Matthew mug, right? Stay nice and caffeinated, overstimulated. Of course, other materials with some water. The trusty spectacles, right? I believe I see a little smudge here. I gotta get all the smudges off, right? Because that can be equally distracting. But of course, like the old man in the sea, I have to have my vision. I've got to be able to make my way through here. And I have your questions pulled up from week 2. And just a healthy reminder, it's nearly impossible at this accelerated pace to work through every question every week. Now, the easiest way to begin the process of kind of siphoning or filtering out questions is questions that overlap too much, right? If someone's asking nearly an identical question, then it makes it easy for me to recognize we can just go with one person's question. Or for those of you kind of new or still working your way through this process of question writing, sometimes it's the question itself. Maybe the way it's phrased isn't lending itself to an open discussion, okay? So sometimes I think a habit that I see, and every habit has a place, right? But sometimes you see a habit where students will write closed-ended questions. They could be simply resolved with a yes or a no, right? So in that way, it's a trick question because it doesn't invite discussion. It doesn't open up in a expoundable way. Another issue area could be sometimes, and it's exciting to watch students work through this process of when and how and in what ways to write questions. You can run into questions that are kind of built like someone that's designing a quiz or an exam, right? So name the 3 parts of, whatever, Stuart Hall's decoding process. And then it becomes like, in exam writing language, it's what we refer to as a short response question or a fill in the blank question, right? Which again doesn't necessarily lend itself to a discourse, to a conversation. And so typically I'm eliminating those types of questions. So really it does have to do with phrasing, or perhaps what areas of the text, sometimes we're picking out obscure maybe aspects of a reading that don't lend themselves to other ideas that are more centrally located within the course or educational goals and so on. So you get the picture, and probably spending more time going into that kind of minutia than we need. So let's jump into questions now, and I want to start with Marcia. Marcia brings a pair of questions I picked out, and let me kind of respond to these as best I can here. From the Roberts Communication Theory and Millennial Popular Culture text, I don't have it in my hand. I see it all the way across the room. I'll grab it. We'll get a visual look at that for our second segment in the series. But we're drawing on that book, which is a new one we're getting into, right? Our third text in the course. And we're just breaking into the introduction here. And for those of you that aren't in the major, let me just clarify and preface. This is a book we use in multiple classes. I think if you're with us throughout the major, you get exposure to this book at least 3 different times. And so please recognize we have a strategic strategy where books do get revisited a couple different times, often. Some of our what we call master texts in the major. But Marcia's first question asks, why are millennials considered to have less communication skills? And do you feel it's valid, coming out of the Roberts book? And let's pause there and say, this is a kind of generalized claim. This is a piece of information that's floated around. And, let's use concrete examples to understand how we get to that. Let's recap a healthy term I used in the week 1 lecture, and that's understanding the difference between what stereotypes are and how we use them, right? Stereotypes are a natural organizing function for us. Cognitively, we receive information all the time, all day long, all kinds of communication. We have to organize reality. And so stereotyping is in its cognitive form a way that we compartmentalize and store information. We're basically creating shorthand, right? You know what I'm talking about, shorthand? You ever take notes for something, or someone ever maybe speaks faster, you got to take quick notes? Hey, maybe you're taking notes for a movie, right, that you're writing a midterm analysis for, or film review for, or something like that. Maybe your media journal, and you're not trying to get everything. You're just the shorthand. In fact, wasn't that our week 1 exercise, right? The field notes, the note-taking strategies. And so, shorthand is akin to stereotyping in a way. We're taking limited amounts of information, and then we're using those to kind of remind us of something. But the danger is when we start to take those limited pieces of information and then fill in the gaps. That is to say, so that our view of something is entirely depicted by those limited stereotypes. All right. So I tried to slowly suggest and unpack that in a way that maybe you're thinking about a concrete example, maybe something real world focused, because isn't that where we encounter this term all the time? The idea of an idea or based around stereotypes, right? Whether it's a different demographic, right? We're talking about millennials, or various like other cultures that are not the one that you grew up around. And this could be regional cultures. It could be national cultures. When we talk about national boundaries, it could be cultures that are segmented by race, cultures that could be segmented by class, maybe cultures, co-cultures, right? Subcultures that are sometimes segmented by gender, right? You think about some private schools still segment gender, and this kind of thing, and so we're left with limited amounts of information to recognize how the other one operates and practices life. And when we over rely on stereotypes to inform our reality, that's when we begin to practice a kind of mindset of ethnocentrism, right? And sort of ethnocentrism, I'm just giving a paraphrased definition here, is the belief in our own immediate culture as superior to others. And I mean, that's a historical practice, right? That's taken place time immemorial, but it remains an issue we struggle with today. And I think certain segments and parts of society struggle with it a great deal, right? It's hard to let go of that. And that's a nice tease, because it feeds into some of the questions that are read in week 2. Really robust questions coming from our audience. So back to Marcia. Why are millennials considered to have less communication skills? And do you feel it's valid? I don't know if it's valid. No, I'm not a full-blown social scientist. I'm not a researcher. I'm in a teaching institution. I do practice research, enough tease, but it's invalid for me to make those kinds of sweeping claims. In fact, that could be a faulty demonstration of stereotyping all its own. But this depends on what we mean by communication skills. Do they have less communication skills? I don't know if they have less communication skills. Instead, let's think about this. Let's think about another term. Let's borrow from philosophy: causality. Ooh, for every cause, there is an effect. For everything we add somewhere, something is subtracted. Are we familiar with this philosophy? Is this a new one for us? It's very exciting if it is. But you think about for all of the extra time that maybe certain segments of our let's just use the U.S. as an example, right? U.S. population, for all the extra time we're using on XYZ types of media. Let's use a smartphone as an example. If we're using that as our primary means of communication, what are we giving up, right? What is the effect, right? And there are some ticks. There are some trends. Hey, use that word. Some trends that we do see that I think could be worth noting. But you can never make that blanket statement holistically across the entire populace. I think that's unfair and unreasonable. But there are certain habits that stand out in recent years. I've noticed. I think I commented this on someone else's question, and we haven't gotten to yet. But eye contact. Okay, young people are very savvy with social media, very savvy with technology. Whether it's in the classroom or in person, small groups or other settings, I notice there's sort of a decrease in average ability to sustain eye contact in conversation. And so, we can look at that as a likely immediate effect, but we don't, you can't just generalize that about everyone, because we don't know enough about their background to make such a qualified claim. And I think those that do grow up around limited media usage would move against the grain of that claim. So they would disprove it. And this gets back to a healthy idea here, that we want to practice. I had it and I lost it. Right, that we want to recognize that claims, broad sweeping claims about an entire demographic or generation or whatever are this is they're argumentative fallacies that suggest these are improper practices, right? And so we can refute that. Follow-up question: do you feel there is really a generational gap in communication? And yes and no. I mean, sometimes there are, and then people catch up, right? A decade ago, young people were all over social media, and guess what? Everybody else followed. And we're all on social media now in some way, some form or fashion. And then, maybe the difference is, well, young people went somewhere else. Okay, isn't it just like everything else societally? You got the new restaurant in town, and everybody wants to go there. And then if it was a hip, cool spot early on, right, and the teenagers and different people were hanging out there, but pretty soon, the boomers and the grandchildren and everybody else is going to be coming in and enjoying those fiddles too. And so the youth are going to move on. And then if the place is not well managed, not well kept up, pretty soon other people are going to move on too, right? And you know, it's a wider business model because it's patternistic of human behavior. So great question, great way to kick us off. Thank you, Marcia. And I think let's take a second break, and I will go grab that other book for future reference, future showcasing, and we'll continue along in our digital dialogue for week 2. Call them 2113.